So we always had a garden, and my mom and me always canned. I mean, it was something that we just did.
I mean, my grandmother canned a lot of things, just everything she could get out of the garden, and always had the cellar full of canned stuff.
We were never hungry. You know, I consider people poor if they don't have food to eat. But we always had food. My mother sewed. She sewed my clothes, and she was a busy lady.
She spent a great deal of time canning, preserving, freezing. We would go over to Emmett and get fruit. She always put up 50 or 100 quarts of cherries or whatever. She was never idle.
I imagine my mother canned over 1,000 quarts of fruits and vegetables and meats because we had nothing to keep meat in.
She was born and raised in Wisconsin, and there it gets so cold at night that they could hang their fresh meat outside and it would stay frozen for the winter. But here we had to do something else with it because we didn't have winters like that. So she would take the beef and cut it like steaks, and we'd fry it and put it down in a crock, and then the tallow that they'd render poured over top of that meat. So we had steak anytime.
I remember the one time we killed about 100 chickens, and I canned most of them. Grandmother used to wring their necks when she'd kill a chicken, and then it would flop all over the place.
When he'd come home from work at night, he'd chop the head off that chicken and had feathers from one end of the house to the other. He'd bring it in and do that all. I would never do that in the house. I would do that outside, you know. And so I never did chop a head off, but when he did that, and Minna, we need a chicken tonight, I'll get another chicken then. I went out there and I got a chicken myself and I chopped his head off. You know, someone said, how could you do it? And I said, well, when you get a mess in the house like that all the time, I said, it's a lot easier to chop a head off a chicken. I said, I just never thought of what I was doing. I just hold it with the wings and by the feet, hold those four things together so they couldn't run and couldn't flap and hit me, you know. And then I took a little hatchet and I laid its head on a brick, and I, not thinking it's a chicken or anything, I just chop its head off. So when Grandpa come home at night, I said, well, I got the chicken all dressed out. Oh, Minna, did you do that? Oh, I didn't know you could do that. I said, I didn't know I could either, but I learned how. So after that, Minna always chopped the heads off and saved that mess in the house.
It's a family thing, so it's a lot of fun, but I think peaches is about my favorite because they're so pretty when you get done with them. And we just boil water and put the peaches in, and one does that, and another one splits them, and then another puts them in from the cold water. You put them in the jars and then process them, and they just are so pretty when you get done with them.
It was very satisfying to her. I mean, the fruit room in the basement, you know, at the end of the season would just be completely full of jars, and the freezer would be full, and it was a very satisfying thing for her to be able to see what I've done, and we would eat well all winter from it.
We'd make money off of our farm. It was for our own use to feed 13 children.
And they bought this place here in 1911, and they built this house in 1912.
I had a brother, William Elmer. I had a brother, Harry. I had a brother, Everett. I had a sister, Floy. I had a sister, Needy. And there was Edna and Rachel and Bernice and Hazel and Lois, myself, and my brother Junior. Now, is that 13?
I wasn't counting.
And I always thought she asked me to help her with the canning because she didn't want me to get in trouble, or she didn't want me to get bored. But now I realize it was because she actually needed my help, and because she realized that if I learned the ways of preserving food that the chances were good that I would do it when I was an adult later on and pass it on to my kids, which, you know, I do it.
First you go and pick the blackberries. You bring them home and you wash them. Usually it's just a matter of under running cold water. Put them in a large pan with a minimum amount of water because there's a lot of juice in those berries. And you just need just enough water to get them to start boiling. You just need to boil them a few minutes and then you put them through a strainer. If you have one that has a fine mesh lining, that's very good. I have a colander that has very small holes, so I put it through that so that I don't end up with those large blackberry seeds. And once you've strained your juice, you follow the directions on the package of pectin mix, and there are several brands of that on the market. And most of them are pretty basic. It's so many cups of juice to so many cups of sugar, plus the one package of pectin, and may or may not call for a little lemon juice. I like to put mine in jars that I can seal with a sealing disc because I really don't like to mess around with paraffin.
Well, you just take and wash your cucumbers and you be sure the blossom end is off. You can leave the stem on if you want. That doesn't hurt, but the blossom end has something to do with the brine, so you be sure to take that little yellow blossom end off. And then just put them in a crock and put your brine on them. It's salt and dill, and you boil that up and you pour that on those pickles.
Oh, we put jalapenos in the corn and can it, and because Fred and John like the jalapenos so well that they like it, and they call it hot corn, and I mark it real good.
Well, you do it in mason jars, quart jars. You put them in the big canner and boil them for 10 minutes at least to sterilize them. To can apricots, you simply wash them, cut them in two, put them into the jars, put a sugar syrup over them, and then put the lids on and put them back in the big canner. Canning fruit is fairly easy. Canning vegetables, you have to use a pressure cooker because you have to be more careful with those.
I don't can vegetables, I prefer to freeze them, but I do can fruits and jellies and jams.
The garden relish consists of the things left over from the garden in the fall. Green tomatoes, peppers, whether they're red or green, lots of onions. It's all chopped up in a food processor, a hand crank food chopper. Sometimes carrots, and chop all those things up. Add vinegar, a lot of vinegar, and mustard seed. Just so it looks right, it looks tasty, and then cook it in a large pot. When you've boiled it for probably 10 minutes till it's cooked thoroughly, then you can put it in your canning jars and then process those in a hot water bath by putting water over the top of the sealed canning jars and bringing them to a boil and boiling them for about 20 minutes.
We didn't have fancy vegetables like they have now, like broccoli and cauliflower. I don't remember them ever growing anything like that. But turnips and radishes, parsnips, beets, just almost any vegetable that was around in those days. Potatoes, of course, and onions. We ate pretty good out of that garden.
I've got spinach, and I've got carrots, I've got beets, and I've got mustard greens, and I've got Swiss chard. I've got watermelons, cantaloupe, corn, beans, potatoes.
And my theory is that a row is much more to take care of if you have a full row than it is part of a row.
He had a huge pile of rock extended probably 30 feet long and 3 or 4 feet wide, a couple of feet high, that he dug out of that dirt that he made for the garden. And in that field, one of the neighbors had a cow. A neighbor across the street, Mr. Lorenz, had a cow, staked it out in that field. And my Uncle Martin went around that field and picked up the cow pies and went and dug them into the garden.
Just yesterday, my sister and I took the pickup and went to a horse farm and loaded the manure in the pickup, and then drove it into the garden here and shoveled it out, just like my dad and I did 40 years ago when I was here.
I used to think horse manure wasn't much good, but if it ages, it's okay.
Otherwise, we use what they call green manure, which is a cover crop. When that gets about 1.5 to 2 feet high, we plow it under.
He'd go down on the beach and haul any kelp that had washed up on the beach there. He'd haul it up the hill and spade it into his garden.
We built this house in 1950, and Mary Jo was just a little girl, and a fellow come here, and it was a new house, so he didn't see any garbage can around here, so he said, "Your parents here, would they like garbage disposal? Would they like us to haul up their garbage?" Mary Jo said, "We don't have any garbage." He says, "What do you do with your garbage?" She says, "We don't have any." She's just a little kid. And he said, "Well, what do you do with your potato peelings and your tin cans?" And she said, "Well, we feed it all to the cows and the chickens." And I laughed when she told me that. I wonder what that man thought. The tin cans, we don't have tin cans.
I found my compost cage. It's just a wire cage, and I put all the compost stuff in the cage. And I plant my English moneymaker tomatoes around the outside of that cage so I can tie them up to the cage.
As kids, we had to work in the gardens from early morning till late night.
I probably started when I was 5 or 6 years old, pulling weeds and doing little things. And I guess I've gardened ever since, as I know.
When I got married, I didn't really know if I wanted to be a farmer or not. But my dad convinced me that I wanted to be a farmer.
You don't get no days off. You're putting in 12, 14 hours a day. You have to make a lot of sacrifice. If you miss a day, that puts you 2 or 3 days behind. You do your plowing and your disking, your leveling the fields out, your planting, and your watering. You're going several months without any money coming in. And it's like, my God, is this going to actually pay off?
I've logged. I've hauled logs. I had a machine shop, but I've still love farming.
I think it's very inspirational, working with plants and flowers and marveling at the way they grow. It's thrilling to me to work with plants and very satisfying.
I love to garden because I like fresh vegetables. And I also have a few flowers because I like flowers too.
The ladybugs are used strictly in corn. They eat the lava in the silt of the corn. That's where what they call a corn borer. So we bring in ladybugs to eat that lava. Otherwise, you got to spray for it. And again, I don't believe in the spray. I'd rather do it that way. If you would spray, you're going to kill the ladybug. And you don't want to do that.
If you have good ground, till it, take care of it, you don't have many pests.
We don't never water our tomatoes because we find if we water them, the blight moves in. And again, you can fight the blight with a chemical, but there's enough moisture in the ground where we don't need to water. It's the same with potatoes. If you water your potatoes, you are going to get the late blight. And I never have any trouble with blight in potatoes. In our peppers, we use a flower. It's marigolds. We use that. That pretty much takes care of a disease that's in peppers. And we found aphis in grapes. Well, to draw the aphis away from the grapes, we used roses at the end of the rows, because it was easier to control the aphis in a rose with a dust. We dust the roses. That way we didn't have to dust the whole field of grapes.
My husband was a school teacher, and teachers in Idaho don't have great salaries. And we figured when we came back to Idaho that that's the way we would do it. We would have a big garden, and we would preserve our own food. We had a cow, and so we had fresh milk for the kids, and that we could live on a Boise salary with 4 children, and we did very well.
She often carried around in her purse our sizes, our shoe sizes. We would trace our feet sizes, and she would go to a rummage sale and take out that piece of paper that had the foot size on it, and she would put it up against the sole of the shoe and see if it would be big enough for us, and that's how we got our shoes.
I lived through the Depression too. You just don't waste anything.
For yeast, she had potato water that she put in a kind of a cooler made in the wall.
They would scavenge from other sources. People that were might tear down a barn, Dad would go and get the old lumber. If he tore down a fence, he would always save the fence posts no matter how long, because the posts were, he could always use them for firewood in the fireplace in the house. My mom was a great sewer, and she would save all the old cloth and yarn. She always repaired our clothes. We rarely went to the store to buy new clothes.
Sometimes I get kind of mad. I went to St. Vincent de Paul one day, and I had extra eggs, so I had a couple dozen eggs, and I had some stuff out of the garden. And there was a lady with a real nice car. She was smoking a cigarette. She had nice, expensive toys laying all through that car. And she got 2 baskets full of food, 2 boxes full of food out of there. And I thought, how come that she can smoke those cigarettes and then come and get that food?
I've always raised enough for our family and my wife's family and maybe another family or 2.
My parents taught me that if I wanted something, to think about whether or not I wanted it or I needed it. And then to think about it over a long period of time, several weeks, even months. And then I would research either the newspaper or by shopping around where the best buy for that particular thing might have been.
The kids are never satisfied now. And it took very little for us kids to be satisfied. When Christmas would come, we didn't get a whole big bunch of expensive stuff, but they never had that.
We would put up the Christmas tree and decorate the Christmas tree, and upstairs we'd go, and Mom and Dad would have all of our Christmas presents and everything on the Christmas tree when we got up. A bunch of kids running down the stairs.
We would go up and stay for 2 weeks at that time. It was a major process getting us all up there, and she would take practically everything but the kitchen sink up to camp for 2 weeks, and she would also take her pressure cooker, canner, and she would can those salmon over the campfire.
One of the big things in the summertime was to go in the hills for a day or 2 fishing for trout. And we get the hay up and maybe have a day or 2 off.
The first fishing pole I had was a casting reel that didn't cast very well. and a telescopic rod that was steel. And it would telescope down into a rod about so long, and then it would telescope out to about a 7-foot rod. And I caught a lot of fish.
We'd go out there and fish, but we didn't get anything. Little minnows or crawfish. There was a lot of those little crawfish there, and we'd get them, but my mother wouldn't cook them all whole. The boys had to kill them, and then they'd take the claws and cook just the claws. But she said, no, I will never put those live fish in boiling water, or those live that was mean to throw them in there. A lot of people said, well, they're dead, why do you throw them in there? Just imagine your body going into a pit of hot water, boiling water. You got to feel that first fall in there. Mother wouldn't stand for that, so we would eat the claws. We kids have a feast. The neighbor kids would come, we'd go catch a big bucket full of those things, bring them home, and the boys would hit them on the head, I guess. I don't know how they killed them. And anyway, they'd take those claws then, and the mother would cook them with a little spice. And then we'd all get outside with a brick and a hammer, and we'd all crack claws, and we'd eat crawfish claws.
I was there the first time she canned clams in her pressure cooker. And she opened it in the house. That's the last time she opened a pressure cooker in the house when she'd cook clams, because the smell would just drive you right out the door. After that, she started taking the pressure cooker out to the far end of the garden and taking the lid off. And then when the smell was dissipated, she'd bring it back inside.
And I did put onions before, but the gophers eat the onions and eat my garlic, which they never did that before. Last year they eat all my onions that I planted, and I see a garlic stem just wiggling like that one day, and I thought, how come that stem's wiggling around out there? It was just the one that came up volunteer, you know, but it's just funny when there's not a breeze, you know, and see that thing wiggling, and I watched it, and it would just wiggle, wiggle. Finally I took a hold of the thing, and there was no garlic on the bottom anymore. They had to chewed it off.
And they love cherries. They don't seem to bother the apricots or the peaches, but they love the cherries that come on in July. And so it's kind of combat against the squirrels. And we have netting that we put over the cherry tree, but the squirrel will chew through the netting, or he'll find a crack in the netting that he gets into. So this year I borrowed a pellet gun, and I went hunting for squirrels.
I kind of grew up with a gun. My dad was a farmer, and once a year he'd go deer hunting, and I just drew time to wait till I could go.
He had gone hunting. He was a great hunter of ducks and deer and what have you. And he had come home with his ducks and parked his car in the garage, and as he took his gun out of the back of the car, it went off, and that was it.
Because he got his first cougar when he was about 12 years old up there. He was raised to hunt and fish and
had a riverboat, and when we would go up or downstream to the places where we wanted to fish, these pink salmon would be so thick that they would swim out of the side and create a wake so large that when you passed, they would be beached onto the sand beaches on either side of the stream and have to flop to get back into the stream.
Got an awful lot of some scruffy kind of fish they didn't want to eat, and he buried them in his flower bed alongside of the house, between the two houses here, which was fine. He was going to fertilize the ground. Great. Except he didn't dig them deep enough, and some of the neighborhood cats started digging them up, and they were very smelly.
My dad would eat rabbit, and we kids just loved rabbit. We raised rabbits there. Brother George, he raised so many of them there. He always had a place in Forest Grove, a butcher shop would always buy them from him. And he'd dress them out and take them down there. And if he got too many ahead, you know, rabbits just multiplied so fast, well, then we'd have rabbit. My dad wouldn't eat rabbit. So one day we didn't say anything we was going to have rabbit, and he thought it was chicken. And Mom said, don't you tell him. And finally, after dinner, he said, that was funny bones for that chicken. different shaped bones.
And when the minister came, he always came about dinner time. And my mother would go out, pick out a chicken, give it one twist, and its head was off, and in about 10 minutes it was in the frying pan. There was another guy, well, he was a relative of my dad, and he'd come about dinner time, and boy, my mother would hit the roof.
It's the German way. You start off in a big frying pan, you put bacon in it, and then you let that fry, and then you shred your red cabbage, you put that in there, and apple, and sometimes you put a little onion in it, and then you make it a sweet and sour vinegar and brown sugar in it, and you just keep cooking it. And it takes about an hour, but it's really pretty good.
With apricots, you cut them in half, take the pit down, of course, and I like to mix them with apple or with pineapple. They're especially good with pineapple. And you'll put the fruit in the bottom of your baking dish, which you previously have sprayed or greased, preferably. And a minimum amount of sugar. I don't like to use too much sugar in cobblers because they really don't, the fruits sweeten up without too much sugar. A dash of cinnamon and nutmeg is always good, and a few little dabs of butter. And then you can put whatever kind of a topping on it you want. You can make a little sweetened biscuit with Bisquick type topping, or you can use a streusel type topping that you make with some butter and brown sugar and flour and a little cinnamon, nutmeg, whatever spices you happen to like in there. Sprinkle that on top. Nuts if you prefer. And just bake it a while.
I don't use recipes. I didn't use no recipe for my bread. I didn't use recipes for anything. I've got so many recipes and it takes too long to go look them up. I just go ahead and fix something.
We feel that home cooked food tastes better than restaurant food. It has less fat in it, less chemicals. It's, as I said, it's left in the garden longer, so it's sweeter, tastier than most restaurant food.
He really liked anything. That man of mine would eat anything, and he liked it. I'd have no trouble with him. And even his dad was that way.
I was raised on the farm, grew up with an opportunity to work with my mother raising a garden, which was a big item in those days because you almost depended on what you raised in the summer, like potatoes, corn, whereas you couldn't freeze anything at that time because we didn't have any electricity. But you would dry a lot of things and put a lot of things in the cellar, and in the fall you'd butcher several hogs, and you would cure it in brine to make hams and bacon and those things. And we hardly ever killed a beef because it was so much meat you couldn't handle it. So you depended more on chicken and pork.
Butcher 2 hogs every year, and we'd make our own ham, smoke them and everything. But he'd always wanted to take the blood and make blood sausage. And so Grandpa would take a big bowl and go out there, and they'd stab the hogs and bring that blood in, and he was all bloody. The bowl was all dripping, and he'd come and walk through the kitchen, go to the sink with that bloody stuff. But I couldn't say anything, you know. I was living with him. And then I had to make bags for him. I'd take white cloth and make bags about so big around, and then we'd pour that blood thickened with that flour in those bags and tie it shut at the top, because I had to sew the sides and sew the bottom shut, and just had to tie it. And then they'd put them in a boiler of boiling water, and they'd drop to the bottom, but when it was cooked, they'd raise to the top, and then they'd take that blood sausage out of there. Then I had to take it the next day and slice it and fry it for breakfast. And he'd get so mad at me because I wouldn't taste it. I thought to myself, you better be glad that I'm frying this for you, but I will never taste it. But he didn't like that idea that I wouldn't taste it even.
Well, we had these pigs. My job usually was 22 and eliminate them. It sounds kind of bad, but you had to have meat, and that was really a quick way to get them out of their misery.
He got mad at me one day because he got a silver gray and he said, Minnie, he always called me Minna, because he's German, you know, he'd say Minna. Minna, I brought home some good meat today. And I said, what did you bring home? He says, a silver gray. He said, you fix that. That is so good, you'll like it. And I said, no, Grandpa, I don't think I want that squirrel. Well, I'll dress it out, he said, and you fix it. So I did. I fried it brown, and then I roasted it and put a little dressing with it. And I put it on the table, and oh, that animal, you know. And Grandpa took some, and my husband took some. And when it come to me, I passed it by, and he said, Minna, aren't you going to eat some of that? And I said, no, Grandpa. You like it so well, you better eat it. I just can't chew it. I can't go it. I never ate any squirrel.
World War II came along the year that I was doing my graduate work at the University of Oregon, and so getting married became much more important than anything else at that time. Everybody was being drafted, friends being killed. So I didn't teach right after college, but after my children were in school, I started a kindergarten right down here. We didn't have public kindergartens in Idaho at that time, so I had started a private kindergarten there, right down there in my garage, and we had all kinds of, my husband made all kinds of play equipment. We had a great kindergarten.
I left home when I was 17 and went to Galesburg, Illinois.
He says, well, we need a center fielder. And I had wanted to go someplace, but country kids didn't go to college very much. So, but I finally started, and I was going to go one semester. And well, I kind of liked it, and I met Margaret, my wife, and so I stayed 4 years.
My first job in the department store, I was an elevator operator, going up and down and up and down. So I got tired of that. So I asked my boss, they had a candy department there, and I asked my boss if I could run the candy department. So he took me off the elevator and put me in the candy department, and I managed it, did all the ordering and everything for the candy. Boy, the candy department volume went up, and I got tired of that, and so he put me in another department.
Jobs were terribly scarce, and so I had a friend that played shortstop on the same team, and his dad was on the school board out of Wilder. They hired his son as superintendent. He hired me as coach. I stayed there 15 years in the school system.
I did a lot of getting them used to numbers and letters and so forth, but it was only maybe 10 minutes out of the entire morning. So no, I think the purpose of kindergarten is to get children adjusted to being with a group and learning how to learn.
But we know what a cow is. Hey, there's a lot of people out there that don't know what a cow is. Our neighbor, they were old people. They had a niece that used to come and visit them all the time, and she was quite small. And this is back when we had cows. Well, she came down and always and visited us when we were milking cows. We got to the end, and that's where the bull was always at, in that stanchion. And he says, how come you're not milking that one? Fred says, that one gives buttermilk. It was the bull. She really believed it all those years.
We had 2 cows, 2 milk cows when I was growing up. And I milked one and my dad milked one. And that was both one of the most frustrating, hard parts of my life, I guess, growing up here. In the wintertime, it was cold, sometimes below 0.
My sister Lois had to milk the cow, and I never could milk the cow to save soul.
Tried to learn to milk the cows, didn't succeed too much at doing that.
It takes some skill in getting milk out of a cow. It takes strong hands and it takes persistence. My dad was always twice as fast as I was at milking, so he would finish the cow in about 6 minutes, and it took me maybe 20 minutes or so.
The dairy part was the worst day is Christmas Day, having to milk cows when there's presents under the tree.
And I remember one time I was going to make lemon pies, and we had a shelf, and it had baking powder, and it had cornstarch on that shelf. And somehow or other, instead of taking the cornstarch down to thicken my lemons for the lemon pie, I took the baking powder. And when I put that baking powder in there to thicken it, it boiled all over. And I said, Mom, there's something wrong, it's boiling over. And she said, girl, what did you do? You must have taken the baking powder. What did you do? Yeah, that's what I did. I was just a little kid yet.
They always made candy, and they always put it in some kind of a box so that each person and anybody that was going to be there for Christmas had a box of candy and nuts, and that was put under the tree. And up in the upstairs, we had a 2-story house, and off of one of the bedrooms upstairs there was we called it the cubby hole. And in the cubby hole they had a big box where they threw all boxes, you know, all the boxes collected up there. So I took it upon myself to get those boxes out of the cubby hole, because nobody else seemed to like to dig around in this dark, dusty place. So that became my job, was to get all of the boxes and get them all out of the cubby hole and get them all lined up, and then they put this, you know, exact amount of candy in each one, because my mother was very precise. She wasn't partial.
He came home, I guess it was what, two years ago from school with a little bitty plant. It was a pumpkin seed they had started at school. So he put it in the backyard, and he was sure proud of that pumpkin. So then last year he wanted to plant again, so I had some pumpkin seeds, and he planted some more, another hill of pumpkins, and he ended up with a 32-pound pumpkin, which ended up on the front porch through October, and then I brought it in and cooked it and strained it and made him pumpkin pie out of it. That's what he wanted.
One time we had cabbage right down below the hill here, and Fred says, hey, the slugs were down there. He says, get a can and get something rather than kill those slugs. He says, go down there and get them. He feared, oh, there's just a few. And I says, okay. So I went down there with a welding rod and a 3-gallon coffee can, and I killed the slugs, went down and put in all the slugs in. He didn't think I had very many. I came up and I had a whole can of slugs. He says, no. I says, now what did I do with them? He says, I don't know, but you got the slugs away.
In those years, people used to have so many flies. I know we did at home, but we had cows there, but they only had 3 cows on the hill there, and that barn was far enough away. And then his sister had a bulldog, and that dog would claw at the screen door till he had a hole in it, and he'd crawl through there and come in the house. Well, at evening, if the door was open, it was hot, well, the flies would come in that way. And at night...
I thought, you know, slugs can't stand anything that's dry. So I had a great big cardboard carton, a big long one that I put in my greenhouse, put my starts on top of it, and I thought, I'll bet you the slugs can't crawl up that box because it's too dry. And I didn't have any trouble with slugs.
And so the other day I went to my garden. Of course, I watered the garden, it was damp, and here there was a big old slug about this long. And I thought, oh gosh, there's slugs here already, and it's this summertime. They usually come later on. Well, he was going into my garden. He was going to help himself to something. I don't know what he wanted, but I decided, you're not going there, mister. So I had a hole in my hand, and I chopped him in half.
It happened in the summer. I was working in the shops then, and when I was using gloves, well, at nighttime, I laid my gloves down, and the spiders moved into that glove. Well, I didn't know they were in there. Well, they bit me on my hand, this hand here, and they got into my shoe. Well, they bit me on the side of my foot. Well, I didn't know what it was at first. I thought I got a blister there. Well, it didn't get any better. I fought it for about 2 or 3 months, but it wasn't getting better, it was getting worse. And well, it put me in the hospital for pretty near about 20 days in the hospital. Plus, it laid me up for a year. I couldn't walk for a year because they had to cut away so much of my heel. All I had left was a bone.
One day I was walking around and came across our greenhouse down here, the Edwards greenhouses, and walked in and asked if they needed any help. And she said, sure, we need more transplanters. So they put me right to work. As we plant the little seedlings out of the seedling tray and put them into the 6-packs, there are a lot of little throwaways that are too small. Everybody throws them into the wheelbarrow there, and they're, you know, put in the compost pile over there and stuff. So after I finished work each day, I would go and dig all these little plants out of the wheelbarrow and bring them home and transplant them and put them in my little greenhouse out here. So I would have the greenhouse just full every place. I had hundreds and hundreds of little plants, and of course I didn't know what they were. That was the thing. I couldn't recognize all these little seedlings, but I just planted them all, and then tried to you know, sort them out so that like things were together, and then I put them along the house here to harden off. And I had plants to give to everybody in the neighborhood, my relatives, and I planted them everywhere. And when they bloomed, then I found out what they were.
I don't know if you know what a bachelor button is. They're just a wildflower. They're blue, some are pink, and some are white. And they got a little center, just a little single flower. And we would go out there, and we'd have to pick and put 26 in a bunch. So Mother would go out with us, and we kids would pick them, and then she would count them so we sure have the right number in it, and tie a rubber band around them, and put them in a big galvanized wash tub with water. And then Dad would come along with his sled and the horse and put that tub on there and drag it down to the greenhouse. And Mr. Martin would take them into Portland, and I guess he made a lot of money on them.
Ron Sasaki, my friend, he bought this big tractor with a great big rotavator. And he brought it over and he says, you got to try this tractor out. So I had this field out here along the highway. So we tried it out. Me and another friend. Well, we each took turns trying it out, and before you knew it, this 15-acre field was rotavated. Well, my dad was so mad. He's talking German to a Japanese, and Ron can't understand what my dad's saying. But what my dad was telling him was that rotavator is killing the worms that's in the ground. My dad never did believe in a rotavator. But if he was here today and could see it, he'd go right back where he come from now, because he couldn't put up with us, I don't think, anymore. Because what he wanted us to do the hard way, we done give that up. We got a rotavator.
I like to taste the sauerkraut.
I like to use the family crocks to make the sauerkraut. We have some crocks that have been handed down from generation to generation that came from my dad's family.
It's the party when we make sauerkraut. Last time we had about 3 or 4, maybe 5 families here. It's sauerkraut day, and we have a lot of fun.
Well, you just take your heads of cabbage and clean them up and take all the bad leaves off, and you cut them in half and cut the core out. And then we have a slicer, like a big grater. It's a big one, so your head of cabbage will fit on it. And then you just have a board that goes on top, and it slides down. This board is about this long, and then there's 3 knives there. And you slide them over those 3 knives, and you have a pan underneath will catch the cabbage all shredded. Then you take that shredded cabbage and put it in a crock, and then you have salt and sugar, a little bit of sugar with it, and you sprinkle it over it. When you get about that 5-6 inches in your crock, then you sprinkle a handful of this. It's all weighed out by the pound, so much cabbage and so much seasoning. And then you sprinkle it on and press it down, and then you go ahead and shred some more, put another layer on, put some more salt on, nothing to it. Just keep pressing it down, pretty soon the juice comes up. That salt takes juice out of that cabbage. And when you get your crock full, then you put a heavy plate over it with a couple of heavy rocks that just kept for that all the time. Put it on top of that plate, and then you cover it with a cloth and let it ferment. And then you have to look at it once in a while. There'll be little moldy spots coming on top of that brine. You just take that moldy spots off and just leave it in that crock. My mother used to put it where we had our pump house. It was cool in there. And Mother would have her crocks of sauerkraut standing in there. And every time we see her going with a certain pan to get sauerkraut, we kids just loved it raw. And we'd run out there and she'd give us all a handful of sauerkraut. I tell you, we had fun in those days.